Smart Balance District Test Coordinator Workshop. We're very happy to have you here to discuss all things related to Smart Balance assessments for this upcoming administration. My name is Jen Cho. I am the Program Manager for the NEAC Smart Balance Consortium. That's the New England Assessment Consortium that New Hampshire is part of in conjunction with Vermont and Connecticut. This is our third week of training. We've already started with Connecticut, then we went to Vermont, and now New Hampshire. Thank you for all the snow. We love it. With me are my colleagues Liz Mortimer as well as Colin Horn. And so today the three of us will be presenting everything about the assessment, all the systems that your teachers and your schools will need to have access to in order to successfully administer this test, as well as special populations and test readiness. Before I get started, how many people participated in the field test last year? Great. The good news is a lot of the systems that you use for the field test, TIDE, TDS, ORS, and we're going to explain these acronyms, are the same systems that you're going to be using for the operational test. AIR was the testing vendor for Smarter Balance last year during the field test. So we administered this test to over 4 million students around the state, had a concurrent user of 185,000 students taking the test at the same time. So if you did the field test, rest assured that a lot of the systems that you'll see will be the same. We've added some features, but just note that all the process will be very familiar to you. For those who have not participated in the field test, please ask as many questions as you want. We are here to help. So if this looks very foreign, it may look very foreign in the beginning, but we're going to do an interactive demo later on today. So hopefully as we get through this training, this information will become more familiar and be easier to understand. Please stop me if we're using too many acronyms or there's something that we said that just didn't make sense. We do welcome all questions. What is Smarter Balance? Multiple choice question. We are a testing vendor, so we're going to start off with an item. Is it a buttery spread that helps lower your cholesterol? Is it a new testing company? Or is it a state government project based at a research university? What's the answer? C is the answer. It is not a buttery spread. It is not a testing company. It is also not a new shoe, as someone else had mentioned in another training. It is a state government project based at a research university. The Smart Balance Consortium is made up of 20+ states, including New Hampshire. So every decision that's made by the consortium has state input. They are also in partnership with UCLA Crest as well in California. So this is definitely a state-based, state government project based with a research university. This is not a testing vendor. All states meet on a regular basis to discuss different topics, make decisions together. This is definitely a state government organization. Who can take the Smart Balance assessments? We know that the Smart Balance assessments are for both math and ELA content areas, no social studies or science. So for math, all students enrolled in grade 3 through 8 and 11 should be sitting for Smart Balance assessments, with the exception of students with the most significant cognitive disabilities, as well as students who have achieved or not achieved but have been given state-approved exemptions. If you have a high schooler student that was in grade 10 one year and is now in grade 12, they will also need to sit for this assessment. The same is true for ELA with one addition. If you have an English language learner who enrolled within 12 months prior to the beginning of testing, they are also exempt from the test as well. Are there any questions regarding who should be taking this assessment? Before we go into the systems, I want to give a high-level discussion or a discussion regarding the testing windows. You can see here the testing windows for New Hampshire. The practice and training test was launched last week. These are the Smart Balance practice and training tests. We'll go over these a little bit more in detail later on. And these will remain open indefinitely until the end of the contract. So they will be there for the summer. They will be there for the fall. If Smart Balance decides to refresh their practice test, we will also refresh your practice and training test as well. The interim assessments, which comprises of ICA, Interim Comprehensive Assessment, and an Interim assessment block, which we'll discuss a little bit more in detail, will be launched February 9th, so next week. And then the summative tests, grades 3 through 8 in high school, will open on March 16th. I do know that the state has sent an email with more information regarding testing blocks for certain grades. Please follow those guidelines that the state sent to you. But we do want to let you know that this window is very long. It will close June 6th. So if you have a student that did not test in that designated testing block, you can certainly test them outside as long as the test is done before June 6th. Yes?
Are there connections to these slides?
Say that again?
Can we get the connection to these slides?
Yes. So the question is whether or not these slides are posted anywhere?
Right.
Yes. So this is actually posted on the New Hampshire portal. And I'm going to go over the URL. We are going to discuss the functionality of the portal, but right now, if you want to download these slides, the URL is nh.portal, portal.airast.org. If you go to that site, I believe the first announcement on that page in the middle will have a link to the PowerPoint. Go ahead. AST. So nh.portal.airast.org. Everyone, go ahead.
So the earliest we can start testing is March 16th?
For the summative, that's correct. And one of the reasons why is, Smart Balance does have a policy about how much instruction needs to take place before testing can begin. There's also some setup that's required by schools and districts before testing can begin as well. And we want to make sure that your staff is adequately trained to be able to administer this test. So I'm going to go through the Smart Balance summative assessments. There are 2 tests per content area for Smart Balance. So for ELA, there's what's known as the CAT test, and then another test known as the performance task test. Before the performance task test, there's also a classroom activity that needs to be administered before that test can begin. So if you want to think about it, there's actually 3 components to a Smart Balance test. The CAT test, which is the adaptive test, the classroom activity, as well as a performance task. We have actually broken out this into 3 different categories, as well as broken out by content area, grade, and grade. These are estimated testing times that Smart Balance has recommended. This was based a lot on field test data. We looked at the field test data to determine how long it would take for students to complete the test. However, I want to let you know that this is an untimed test. So these are just recommendations, they're not requirements. So even though we've suggested for a 3rd grader that it would probably take an hour and a half to complete the ELA test, if it takes your 3rd grader longer, that's fine as well. Just recommendations. So the one that looks specifically at an ELA timing and sequencing part of the test, we'll look to see that they've been divided by CAT items, classroom activity, and the performance task test. For the CAT test, the recommendation is to do this test in 2 sessions, 40 to 60 minutes each session. Breaks are allowed, but the reason why we recommend that this test be given in 2 sessions is we want to make sure that fatigue doesn't play a factor when students are taking these tests. You may find that high schoolers may not need 2 sessions and may not need 60 minutes each. They may be able to take this in an hour and a half in one setting. Maybe some students in your lower grades may need multiple sessions. This is something that you, your school, and your TAs can work together to provide the best situation for your school and your students. I talk about breaks. Breaks are allowed on this test. However, we want to let you know that for the CAT test, there is a 20-minute pause rule. So what I mean by 20-minute pause rule is that if a student breaks for more than 20 minutes, they will not be allowed to go back to previously responded items. They can resume the test. They just can't go back and change answers from items they've answered previously. So for instance, if you do have 2 testing sessions, one on Monday and one on Tuesday, and let's say you pause the test for that Monday, after that day on Monday, and you start again on Tuesday, the student will be able to resume the test. They just can't go back and change answers to previously responded to items. And the reason why we do that is more for cheating. We want to make sure that students don't go home, look up the answers, and be able to change their answers the next day. Good question?
I did. Is it like the 20 minutes, anything more than 20 minutes, or the 20 minutes is that cutoff?
It's 20 minutes is the cutoff. So let's say that you go back to the test within 20 minutes. Let's say you only took a 10-minute break, or you went to use the restroom. You will then nothing. You can continue the test. You can go back to the items you've seen before. It's just after 20 minutes when all those previously responsive items will no longer be available.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
What if the kids have to leave, there's a fire drill, something like that? What happens, and they don't hit pause?
So there's a situation like that. We're going to go into those examples. You would file an appeal online, and we would reopen this entire test for that student. So I'll discuss a little bit more of that situation a little bit later on. Go ahead.
I was curious about when kids are writing an open response question, is that considered answered even if they didn't have time to finish it?
That does. So if you have an open response, like a short answer, they must complete it. And once they fill in something, it's considered as responded to, because the system doesn't know if the student is done or not. So if a student is working on a short answer item on the last, it's their last item of the day, make sure they're done with it before they pause the test and, resume the next day. The classroom activity, as we discussed a little bit before, is going to be a 30-minute activity administered a couple days before the performance task. And then for ELA, there's also a performance task as well. The performance task for ELA has 2 components. The first component contains research items. The second part contains a full write, or what's also known as a writing prompt. Each grade has a writing prompt. So it's important to know that every student taking the ELA test will have a writing section. You can also, for the performance task, there's actually no pause rule. So if you start that test and continue it the next day, students can go back to previously responded questions and look at that as well. The one other thing I want to talk about in terms of the ELA test is the expiration dates for these tests. The CAT test has an expiration date of 45 days, which means that if I start the test on day 1, it will expire in 45 days, which means the student must complete that test within 45 days. For the performance task, the expiration date is 10 days. And this is especially important to note because if you start the test, the performance task, go on spring break, and then come back, wait another week before testing begins on this, it is very possible that you will find that this test has expired. And we will go over what to do if you do come across that situation where you have expired tests. Any other questions regarding ELA time and sequencing?
Can the classroom activity be done the same day?
It can. And I'll discuss a little bit more about what different teachers have done. So this is the mathematics timing and sequencing. The same test expiration, 45 days for the CAT, 10 days for the PT, applied here. The same pause rules also apply for math. So there's a 20-minute pause rule for the CAT test, no pause rule for the performance task test. There is also a classroom activity that needs to be done before the performance task can be administered. And then the recommendation for the math is to be able to do that in 2 sessions, 40 to 60 minutes each. But like I said, these are just recommendations. You may want to adjust depending on the needs of your student. So this is just another diagram of testing sessions. We have discussed, perhaps a teacher may want to administer the CAT first on one day, then go on to the classroom activity another day, and then on the 3rd day, do the performance task. But these are just recommendations. So if you find that your students can handle the classroom activity and the test on the same day, that's allowed. If you want to administer all the CATs on before the performance test. Let's say you want to do ELA CAT and then math CAT before you move on to the performance test. That's totally fine as well. If you want to do the performance test before the CAT, totally okay. The system will not mandate the order of this test. Go ahead.
So, 2 slides back, when you have your time limit sequencing, in the ELA it says that it should not occur on the same day as class activity in the performance task on the math it can.
Yes.
So because it sounded like you might have said something different than that. So I just want to make sure, so the ELA, they need to be on separate days, but the math they can be on the same day.
They can't be on the same day. We do recommend ELA being on separate days just because ELA has that full right. So we know that it takes a lot more energy to complete the writing problem. However, as I said before, these are just recommendations. If you find that high school students can do the classroom activity and can do the ELA performance test, that's fine as well. You know your students. And someone in another training had asked if they could do all the tests in one day. You know, and I would say personally, I think that's a lot of testing. But if you think your students can do it, then I'm not going to say no to it either. These are recommendations. Go ahead.
Are you going to talk about what happens if kids are absent during the classroom activity?
Okay, so we'll have a slide on the classroom activity and I'll bring that up. So the classroom activity is recommended to be administered no more than 3 days before the performance task, and it will take approximately 30 minutes to complete. This is designed to level the playing field to ensure that all students understand the content of the task before they actually start taking the test. And it's administered in a classroom setting. So the question is, if the student is absent, what do? You would have to make it up at a later date for a student before they take the performance task. We have questions as to whether or not this could be filmed. You can certainly film your classroom activity with your students and then provide it to the student who's absent so they can review it before they actually start the test as well. So topics and scripted classroom activities available for download in the test information distribution engine. That's one of our first systems that we're going to talk about a little bit later on. It may not make sense to some of you right now, but for those who did the field test, you may recall that all the classroom activities were posted on the portal, and then there was an Excel lookup table where you had to go in, find your school, find your grade, find your content area, and decide which task you were assigned to. We're going to cut all that out. The PDFs associated to classroom activities for the topics your school will be assigned to will be directly uploaded into Tide. So all a teacher will have to do is grab the relevant content area and grade. Any questions regarding classroom activity?
How do we find out which activity we're assigned?
So this is we're still in development, still developing Tide to be able to support this. But what it's going to be a tab in our system. So it will be a tab called classroom activity. And then when you go in, it will have all the PDFs, 14 PDFs, one per grade and content area in that tab. So if I'm a grade 3 student, grade 3 teacher, I would go into Tide, log into the system, go to classroom activity, and download the grade 3 activities for the test I would be making. Go ahead.
How far in advance will this performance task be available?
Right now, the goal is to have it ready by the end of February, early March. We don't want to have it up too far in advance, so it's typically a week before testing begins. I talked a little bit about this before, but Smarter Bounds does offer a practice and training test. What we've done with these practice and training tests is we've actually cloned them and put them in the New Hampshire environment. So New Hampshire, if you look on the portal, you'll see a link to this practice and training test. The practice test is a test that mimics very much like the summative test. It's a full-length test. It's approximately 30 items, and we have a practice test for each content area and each grade. The only thing different is it's not adaptive, and it doesn't score. So there are scoring guides that are provided. These are also posted on the portal. We also offer a performance test for each content area. Go ahead.
I'm looking for this information on the portal. Can you help me find it?
Yeah, so if you're looking at the homepage of the portal, if you look at the right, there might be something called a practice training test icon below the secure browser. And right now, that can help you during the break, but we'll also have a slide on the portal so we can show you where that is. The training test is a shorter test. It consists of 6 to 9 items and it's broken up by grade band. So there's a grade 3 through 5 training test, 6 through 8 in high school. And this is a training test that is mainly designed to make sure students become familiar with the test delivery system as well as the different tools that are being offered. So the practice test, I would encourage students to take it if they want to know what kind of content will be assessed. If you want to make sure your students are ready for actual online testing and know how to navigate through the system, the training test is that test. It's a shorter test. It has an example of each different item type, and we do encourage that all students take the training test within 3 weeks of when testing starts. Someone asked me what's the most important thing to take away, or how should I best make sure I'm ready for this test? And my answer is always simulate the actual testing experience by having students take the practice and training test using the secure browser. If you can get through that test and there's no problem, you should be fine for a summative. But that early dry run will let you know if there's technology issues that you need to address or anything else that needs to be addressed before testing begins. Was there a question over here?
Yeah, how often do you recommend them doing just one time taking the training test, or?
I would say one time. I think it depends on how familiar they are with the tools. So, you know, the training test is also fixed. So if you have a student who's taking it, gets it really quickly, taking it again may not help them. But for a student who is still struggling with the different item types, maybe taking it as a refresher a week later, just to see if they're getting more acclimated to the testing environment may help.
Can you say how long the training test was, approximately?
In terms of the amount of time to take it, I would say if you had a 30-minute class session, you could do it within. Again, it's not a review of content, it's to make sure they understand the tools. So I talked a little bit about the response type. So if you're familiar with paper pencil test, you'll know that in the past we've had selected response and constructed response. But for Smart Bounds, we're offering a plethora of different item types. And this ranges from multiple choice to multi-select to matching table fill-ins, drag and drop, grafting. So many different item types. So that's why we say it's very important that students take these training tests, become familiar with how to respond to these items. We do have item tutorials that are associated with each of these items. So if a student is having trouble answering an item or doesn't know how to respond to it, they can certainly watch an item tutorial while testing to kind of give those pointers on what to do. These item tutorials, we've also posted them to the portal if you also want to check those tutorials out as well. In addition, Smart Bounds offers an array of embedded universal tools, designated supports, and accommodations. And universal tools are known as strike-through, highlighted. All students will get these universal tools. There are designated supports such as masking, streamline, translation, glossaries translated in 10 different languages, stacked translation in Spanish, as well as text-to-speech items. And there are also accommodations as well. The different accommodations are Braille, ASL, text-to-speech, and closed captioning. This is available on every single practice and training test. We will discuss in more detail later on how, if a student needs one of these accommodations or designated supports, how to set that student's profile to get it so that when they start testing, they will be receiving each of the appropriate designated supports and accommodations. So when I say, take the training test to make sure they're familiar with it, how to respond to different item types, we also want to make sure that if they, for instance, get closed captioning, they know how to use that tool. If they need ASL videos, they're familiar with how to retrieve the ASL videos on the test. So like any test, regardless if it's online or paper, these items must be kept secure. This is a consortium-led assessment, as I mentioned before. So there are 20 states using the same item bank. So if there's any breach or any security, anything that compromises test security, we need to be made aware of. Smart Bounds has actually broken this up into 3 categories: impropriety, irregularity, and breach. Impropriety are situations are low impact, doesn't really affect students' testing. Examples could be if a student called out in the middle of testing or walked out of assessment. We would just ask the TA, the school coordinator, to just take corrective action on the spot, but does not need to be reported. Irregularities happen. For example, if, let's say there's a fire drill and testing had to stop, or a student started a test without the proper accommodations, it may affect the student's performance. So we will discuss what happens, or the different irregularities that can happen, and what you should do in order to correct the irregularities. Breach is when there's an event that poses security or threat to the validity of the test. So if a student takes pictures on their phone of the items on the test, if a teacher uses materials and makes them public or something like that, if there's a breach like this, this needs to be reported to the school coordinator and district coordinator immediately, and you as a district coordinator need to let the state know immediately as well, because the state will need to then escalate it to the consortium. So last year during the field test, we actually encountered many Twitter breaches. Lots of students took pictures with their cell phone and posted it to Twitter or Instagram. We will have a set of UCLA graduate students who are going to be monitoring social media this year. So if this does happen, Scott will get a call from the consortium, and he will probably call you and ask what's going on. This is a secure test. So it's very important that the TA, as they're offering this test, make sure that cell phones are not being used and that students are not taking pictures of the items. I don't think anything was done maliciously, but we just want to make sure that we are watchful of this taking place. So I talked a little bit about the irregularities, and we had talked a little bit about what happens if you have a fire drill or a student starts a wrong test. There are different appeal types that you can do in TIE, and I'm just going to go through each of the different circumstances that might warrant each of these appeals. So we have a resetting a test, reopening a test, grace period extension, restoring a test that has been reset, or validating a test. So if the student starts a test, realizes at item 3, text-to-speech wasn't turned on, or I need an ASL and I don't see the videos, and you realize that the proper accommodation wasn't set for that student, what you should then do is request to the state that this test be reset. And what the state will do will approve it. The system will then clear out the first test and reset it, and the student can start again with the proper accommodation. Reopen a test. Remember how I talked about if you started as a performance test and then went on spring break and then waited another week before resuming that test, chances are that test will be expired. So if you have an expired test, you can reopen a test by setting the reopen appeal. Grace period extension is for, go ahead.
How long does it take to reset the test?
So we usually say do it in 24 hours, say it takes 24 hours, because not only the TA would need to let the school coordinator or the district coordinator know that this appeal needs to take place. Then the appeal needs to be filed in time, and then the state would need to approve it. The state would have to review it, either approve it or follow up with a call to see what's going on. So we say the entire process takes 24 hours. But if there's an urgent need that it needs to be done that day so that the students can resume testing, then you can certainly call and ask if it can be escalated. So it's done in real time, but it also depends on how long it takes to approve the request. Go ahead.
Yeah, kind of the same question. I was going on a field test last year. So say something goes wrong, with 5 or 6 kids just selecting the wrong way. The impression I was getting, like, there's nothing today, it can't be reset. You're saying, we always before was call on the phone and change it. You can't do that now?
Okay, so say that again.
You have a problem starting a test for a student, the wrong profile, something incorrectly, you do 4 or 5 things, and you start the wrong test, something goes wrong. You can't just call on the fly anymore and fix it.
No, and I don't know, you said you could do that for a field test? Okay, so who did you call? Okay, no, there is a process for filing an appeal, because you have to request the student, you have to tell us which test, as well as, then it gets sent to the state with all the information they need to approve. So I guess the call on the fly is, let's say that you do submit this and you need this to be done right away, then you would just call so that someone can go in and actually approve it right away.
Yeah, what I was looking at is if the student hits a button, starts the test, and then it's wrong, then it's done. What you're saying, it takes up the day.
It does.
Okay.
So the grace period extension. So there was an example of what happens if there's a fire. Go ahead.
Just could you clarify, when you say test, do you mean all of the subsections, or do you mean the ELA computer adaptive, the ELA, like, can you clarify? Because
So there are actually each student.
English.
Yeah, so what's a test? So each student's going to be sitting for 4 different tests.
Okay.
The ELA CAT test, the ELA PT test, the math CAT, and the math PT. So when we talk about these tests here, if you file an appeal, you actually have to file and select the test to appeal on. So just because you ask to reset the math CAT doesn't mean it's going to reset the ELA test. Go ahead.
Is there a direct point of contact in case any of these issues do arise?
So we do have a help desk. If you do have any questions, there's a slide with all that information. If you're not sure if what's an appeal or what constitutes an appeal or what the right appeal is, feel free to call the help desk and we can direct you. Go ahead.
Is there a form or policy that supports the reset test process for staff? Or is it based on the judgment of the test coordinator?
There is going to be a TAM that's going to, or test administration manual that's going to go out with information on what the circumstances that would require each of these appeals. So we would give examples of what, the different situations that would occur and, what category you would fit in. If there's one that you run into a situation that isn't listed in the test administration manual, that's when we would say call the help desk and we can help you figure out which one's the most appropriate appeal.
Can you clarify again, so who is making the decision on, we call it state?
The state. So the way the appeal process works is the TA is going to let the school coordinator or the district coordinator know that the appeal needs to be made. Either a reset or grace period extension, they would give all the information to the school coordinator or the district coordinator. The coordinators will then need to go into time, a test information distribution engine, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, and request that this test be appealed. So they're going to put in all the information, and then it gets sent to the state. The state will then review it, approve it or deny it, and an email will be sent back to you saying this appeal has been approved or denied.
I'm concerned about the number of people, I'm thinking of a bottleneck of all these appeals coming in. So how is it going to be handled by the state?
Scott and I can talk a little bit more about that. Are you thinking that there's going to be a lot of appeals, or?
Well, I know that it's a wide open window, so it's not like, it's not like DCAT, where everybody's testing with a certain, much more compressed time. But again, it all depends on who's available, who's answering the phone, who's answering the email, because if you don't have a lot of bodies to do that, I'm anticipating that the first few days of this, there's going to be a lot of schools that are going to have issues that are going to be calling. And we're just going to see high numbers relative to the number of schools that are.
Well, we'll figure out what to say. I do know that multiple states will have accounts to be able to approve. So we'll talk about process and make sure they get approved or cleared out and processed as soon as possible.
And can we get communication on that?
We can put it in. It's going to be in the test administration manual, but we can also expand on that to go over your concerns. Go ahead.
Are you going to address children who are in private special ed programs who are sent from, say, 10 different districts into one building? Do we have to then notify their district? I just don't know how the hierarchy of that, how that's all going to work, but who's actually going to be the coordinator for those children, how that information about where they're placed gets to everybody? I just don't know how that works.
Okay, let me finish the appeals part, and then we're going to talk about the uploading of district and schools and all the user information into TIDE, and let's see if we can address it through discussion of the I-4CE process, as well as, we'll go through that when we talk about the registration process. So just to quickly go through the remaining appeals, the grace period extension is for situations like the fire drill, where there is a fire drill happening. You don't have time, you're not going to tell your students to check all your answers before you evacuate the building. So if that's the case, A grace period extension is the way to go. This will reopen the test and allow students to be able to look back at previously responded questions. That's the key difference between a reopen and a grace period extension. Restore a test that has been reset. Let's say you ask that the math test be reset, and we reset it. And then you realize, oh, I shouldn't have done that. It should have been ELA. Well, we can restore that math test that shouldn't have been reset, so it's no harm, no foul, but we'll go back to its original state. Invalidate a test should be very rare. If there's a security breach or there's cheating going on, you may need to invalidate this test and not have this test should not have a score. This is something that you would need to consult with the state and then request an invalidation if the situation warrants it. Interim assessments. Before I go on to these interim assessments, are there any questions regarding appeals? Okay, so Smart Balance is offering interim assessments. They are available, and there's two parts. There's an interim assessment block as well as an interim comprehensive assessment. The interim assessment blocks is actually a shorter form, shorter test. There are probably around 15 items, and they're focused on a particular claimant target. So you could have a block focused on just geometry, or a block focused on listening items. For the interim comprehensive assessments, these are full-length tests, so they're going to mirror a lot like the summative tests. The only exception is these are fixed forms, they're not adaptive. In order to be able to take these assessments, you would need to have users loaded in Tide, and we'll discuss a little bit about that when we talk about the systems. There are required designated supports and accommodations for each student needs to be loaded in Tide as well. And educators must be trained. And the reason why we say that this is really important is because the interim assessment does have hand-scored items that the teacher can actually hand-score themselves through a system known as the teacher hand-scoring system. Unlike the summative, where the hand-scored items are going to be scored by a vendor, teachers can actually score these items, see how their students responded to each question. So there's a couple systems that the teachers need to be able to be familiar with before they can actually begin to administer an interim assessment and get a score for these students. Students can take the interim assessment as well as the practice and training tests. Throughout these trainings, we've been asking the priority of the interim assessments. There are definitely tests that you should take, but we also know that there's a lot going on right now, and the priority really should be making sure that teachers are ready to administer the summative. So the interim tests are optional. They're additional resources. They will be open throughout the entire testing window, and hopefully in the future we're going to have these interim assessments open in the fall so that students can start taking these tests earlier in the year rather than right before the summative administration.
Is there any way in the system to turn those off until you know that teachers are trained?
There isn't. They're all going to be there available. In the future, they will. That is the plan, is to make interim assessments adaptive. So the turnaround time to get scores is dependent on how fast your teachers can actually hand score guidance. So the way it works is that you take a student takes an interim test. There are going to be both machine scored items as well as hand scored items. The machine scored items will be scored by the scoring algorithm. But the hand scored items, those responses are going to go into the system known as the teacher hand scoring system. And teachers will be able to log in, look at their students' responses, and score them. Once all the responses to a student's test has been scored, that's when we can turn around and provide a score for that student. Okay?
I keep missing the big picture here. What's the purpose of the interim assessment?
So the interim assessment is more to, if we had done them in the fall, maybe to have your students take them earlier just to see, how much material they know, just to kind of gauge where they are and then take it a little bit later on. Because of all the activities that took place this fall with the standard setting and the data review and stuff, we could not get these interim assessments out until now. Okay?
Do you have an estimate on how many hand-scored items there are, how much time will test will take each for the hand-scored?
So a lot of the math CAT tests do not have hand-scored items. The performance task items is around maybe 3 to 4 items per test. the ELA pack definitely has more hand scored items. I'm not sure at the moment. I think how long it takes teachers to hand score, I think depends on the content area. You know, for the full right on the performance task, that may take a teacher longer to read through and grade that response rather than maybe a short answer. So I'm not actually sure how long it would take for a teacher to discuss it. We do know that those who are doing the interim, people have like to do it as a professional development where teachers get together with their computers and discuss the different responses and score them together too. So this can be an interactive part as well for the teachers. Go ahead.
With the educators being trained, is there something on in the system for that, or what's the training for the educators?
For the interim? Or just in general?
In general, for the hand scoring, for that.
So we're going to talk about the portal in a couple slides, and we're going to talk about the different modules, the different user guides, everything that's going to be provided and posted on the portal for your schools and your TAs to review and just get more information of how these systems work.
It's going to be, or it is now?
Some of them are posted. We're also posting the remaining modules in the next couple of weeks.
Was that I think you answered how we're going to get trained for the real test, or the actual annual test, but I think she was asking about the interim.
So you're talking about the interim then, or
either or both.
Oh,
Just
okay.
what's the educator training going to be?
So there are going to be modules that are placed that have either been placed on the portal or will be placed on the portal. The teacher hand scoring system module is not up right now because it's so new, but we want to just give you an overview of the system, and we'll have that module posted pretty soon. Are there any additional questions?
Just to be able to plan for time, do you know about an average how long the training takes for teachers? Because it needs time in order to do that.
I would say in terms of time.
Can you repeat that?
So the question is, in terms of time, how long do you think it will take to train teachers?
For what specifically?
Well, for I guess administering the test, right? Getting everything right. I would say that, I don't know for sure. I do know that there are lots of schools and districts who are starting a month in advance, but not, spending a whole day, bombarding them with information. People are doing it in sections. There's going to be a section on how to make sure all the information is correct in time. There's going to be a section on how to actually set up a test session and make sure you're familiar with how to do the proper student interaction. So it's dependent on whether or not you want to just spend a day training them on all the systems, or doing kind of a demo, making sure everyone's familiar with it, or doing it in sections.
I guess my only concern is that the test starts the window of the 16th of March, but yet the modules are not available yet. I'm just trying to kind of come up with a timeline.
They should be available by, the remaining ones should be available by mid-February. And the ones that we've been posting have been what we would prioritize as the most important, such as the test administrator interface, what is the task, what is the performance task. So those are already posted. But just because the window starts March 16th doesn't mean that you actually have to start March 16th. It is a long window. So if you don't think you're ready yet, you can also delay it and then start the testing later on.